Hey, what's going on, Thrive Hive? It's Chris and Hannah.
Hello.
And we are here with a new friend. His name is Sher Butt, and B-U-T-T, S-H-E-R-B-U-T-T.
Yes.
And he is an amazing human being that we've had the just honor of spending a lot of time with over the past almost 2 weeks now. Oh my gosh. So he's extended his flight several times to be here today.
Hanging out with us,
Hanging
ZARIA.
out. Exactly.
So I'm glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Coming to you from the living room in our ZARIA Eco Hotel and Retreat Center. But you inspired this interview when we were having dinner a couple nights ago.
Right.
And the reason for that inspiration is that, you know, Hannah and I are very public about our journeys using plant medicines to help us with our healing, helped us with our marriage. It helped me grow and change. It's helped her in her process and in her own growth. And I mean, going down that rabbit hole is a whole different story. But it was our conversation the other night that I was like, oh my gosh, we need to get Sher on an episode of Thrive Hive, because this is powerful stuff. Because one of the things is you're a biochemist.
Yes.
Right? And you create, I mean, all sorts of products.
Right.
And it's all about helping the planet and reducing carbon footprint and helping in a lot of different ways.
Right.
But one of the areas that you participate in or are involved in helping humanity is in the synthetic creation of psychedelics? Biosynthetic?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so there are 3 ways to make any product that comes from nature.
Okay.
The first is extracting something from a fungus or a plant, which is the traditional way that things have been done for tens of thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
The second way is to use chemical synthesis, which is taking a bunch of different chemicals in the lab and mixing them together. The downside with using chemical synthesis is that typically for every kilogram of product that you produce, whether it's a drug or other substance, you have 5 to 10 kilograms of toxic waste. And when I say toxic waste, it's molecules or toxic or waste that cannot just be put out in a river or put out there. You have to spend additional resources and time and also additional chemicals to detoxify that. And typically in countries that don't have stringent code, that never happens. So that all goes in the environment.
Wow.
And the third and the most recent way of manufacturing, which has evolved, I would say, in probably the last 25, 30 years, is biosynthesis. So the idea is that every cell in the human body, in an animal, in a plant, is sort of like a mini factory.
Okay.
So every little factory, so you can think of, an organism, which is made by nature, is billions and trillions of mini factories that have bridges between them, and they're exchanging goods. So one factory, let's say, makes towels. The other one makes shampoo. And they basically have bridges that exchange it so people can take a shower. So what we did is we took that concept and realized that there happens to be a lot of different things. And I'll go into my story of how I came up with it. But there happen to be a lot of different naturally occurring molecules that come from rare plants, rare funguses, that are very expensive. And that goes into my story. So as a biochemist, I was in 2011, I started working as lab director of Steep Hill, which was the largest cannabis testing lab in the world. They had multiple branches. They used to test for potency, like how many cannabinoids are in a strain or a cannabis waffle or a chocolate or a lollipop.
Okay.
Then we used to test for pesticides. We used to test for heavy metals. We used to test for microbiological contaminants like bacteria, mold, etc., and then water content, things like that. So that was the standardized way for bringing quality grade, cannabis to the market. So as lab director, I ended up, setting up a lot of new things and also testing products. So while I was testing cannabis products for dispensaries and other, quality control for different companies that wanted direction, that was one of the times where CBD was newly coming on the scene, and I was we were one of the first people to test it. And the interesting thing that people said about CBD was, well, this is useless because it doesn't even get you high. But my view was that no, this is very valuable because a lot of people take THC for pain and anxiety and other things, but if you're chronically stoned all day, you can't really, effectively function at work or drive a car or do all these things that you would need to do. So for me, it represented a very unique opportunity that here's something that may not have exactly the same effects, but but there are a lot of overlaps. But the problem was at that point. I mean, as the lab director of TPL, I was making a decent salary as well. But CBD was only found in a few strains of cannabis. And because it was like Blue Suede Shoes was one of the first strains of cannabis that ever had, and Harlequin were the two ones that I was initially tested. They had between 5 to 7% CBD, right? So the problem now was that for getting a pure kilogram, just as a metric, just as we'll talk about different molecules, we'll talk in kilograms or grams, was that to purify and get pure CBD that was 99 or 100% pure, your cost of that was somewhere around $100,000 or more. This is back in 2011, around that time. So the thought always stuck in my head was like, for some people, you may need a few grams of CBD a day, people with epilepsy, people with other conditions. And it's not possible for people that even make decent salaries to be able to afford that. Another thing happened while this whole thing was going on. Another very interesting thing happened. We had a lady and her 13-year-old autistic son show up to the lab one day, and a camera crew came. I had no idea what was happening, but I mean, I'm curious. I'm the lab director. I'm sitting there.
Sure.
And while I was sitting there, the mom and the people there were like, "Hey, let's give this the kid a CBD chocolate." So my initial thought was, this is maybe not the right thing. I mean, it's something who's under 18. Can they even consent? But I have to tell you that within about 45 minutes that I was sitting there, I noticed that the way the child was talking changed. It came to the almost like there was very little autism left in the speech, and that was for me was I did not expect that.
Sure.
I didn't expect that.
Yeah,
right?
no,
I mean,
that's a big result. Really
Right.
good.
Yeah, so I mean,
But that was CBD.
That was
not
CBD.
THC.
That was CBD.
So quick
Right.
primer. Is it CBD? How do you describe it quickly between the difference between the
CBD
two?
and THC are very similar. The main differentiator I would say is CBD is non-psychoactive, which means that it's like vitamin C. You could take 20 pills of vitamin C. You're not going to get high. You're going to be able to drive a car. So for me, that was a very profound perspective shift for me. That went to like, you know what, and this could be something. So
And what year was that?
this was 2011.
2011.
2011.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Autism. Wow.
and from there, the idea kind of started coming as it was just an idea. I mean, I didn't do any work on it, but it was just some concept in my mind, right? Which was, there's got to be a better way to make these molecules. So I left the job at Steep Hill because I got a good offer from a pharmaceutical company, Novartis Pharmaceuticals, in the Bay Area, and I went there to work with the pharmaceutical company, work with the FDA on clinical design and studies, and while I was there, the idea kind of stayed with me, and I thought, you know what, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I started reading research papers. It actually came to a point where I got obsessed with it. And I'm a very obsessive person by nature, and
Scientists generally are. It's
Right.
kind of a thing.
Challenging, but it also makes you amazing at what
It
you
makes-
do.
Right.
Right.
But I didn't know where this was going. I mean, there was a lot of other things happening in my life at that point. And but what stuck with me was that there's got to be some way. And by being a biochemistry major, I did realize that cells are machines. They're factories. So I started reading papers on biotechnology. Did that for a few years actually. And then I decided I wanted to, launch some sort of a project or concept. So I left my job. I got into UC San Diego for an MBA. So I moved down to San Diego, and that's when I decided, like, hey, I'm actually going to formally launch this company, and so that took me down the rabbit hole of let's make this. While I was in business school, the first year of MBA, most people got internships. Instead, we had this attorney in California, up in Marin, who was a cannabis attorney, and he contacted me out of the blue. We had known each other in the past, and he said, "Hey, we're launching a cannabis lab, and we want you to be a co-founder and a chief scientific officer and help us set this up, and you're going to be one of the partners." So I said, "Okay, you know what? I'm going to go up there for summer." So now I am up in Marin. I'm setting up this cannabis testing lab. We went from an empty warehouse to set up and everything ready to go within about 2.5 months. And while I was there, one of my oldest college roommates from undergrad at UC Davis, who was out of all our group of friends, like one of the smartest guys, and we were friends, and
Yep.
also my roommate at that point, and he was finishing his PhD in Berkeley in bioengineering. And funny enough, we met up at a bar to have a beer, and we're sitting down, and I'm telling him about the cannabis side of things, lab testing, and where it's going, and he's talking to me about like things he's doing in the lab, and and then it clicked for me that what, I understand the cannabis side of things, you understand the biochemistry side of this. Why don't we start a project where we can engineer the pathway in yeast for the production of CBD? So that's sort of where the initial concept began. And then I went back to San Diego. I had my second year of business school. We didn't really have any money. I wasn't even a U.S. citizen back then. So our first lab was literally in my garage.
Nice.
Not even kidding. And obviously we didn't have a lot
like
of lab
Apple.
equipment,
Like
right?
Apple,
like
I
Apple.
know.
Right.
I mean,
Right. And but we had to outsource a lot of things, right? Because we didn't have a lot of the equipment there. So,
yeah.
but it was a small operation. It was just my own little amount of money that I had, and then in business school, the last year, they said, hey, pitch a project. So I said, why don't I pitch this as my project? And they accepted
Nice.
it. And we did the pitch, and then the last day of that class, they brought in an expert in an industry to basically give us critique on the project. And the person they brought in to critique my project was a very well-known ENT surgeon at the business school, or like the medical school at UC San Diego, and she had also gotten her MBA from there, so that's how they knew her. And at that my point in my head was like, all right, business school is ending. I'm not a citizen. I don't know where this thing is going. This is, by the way, this is like 2016.
Okay.
So cannabis was not federally legal or legal in California
Right.
statewide. So I was like, all right, whatever. I'm probably going to go and beg Novartis to give me back my job or something like that. But this was a cool idea. And then by the end of that first hour of the critique session, she said, you know what, here's my contact info. Come over to my house, meet my husband. We will invest in you. So I was like,
Wow.
okay. And then
Nailed it.
I didn't call her the next day because I was like, you know what, people are nice. People see a lot of things. I don't want to be a burden and all this. So I didn't call her. She called me the next day and said, where are you? We're expecting you.
What's
Come
wrong with
over.
you?
So I did. So I went over, and in 2 weeks, I went there a couple days a week just to ideate it a little bit more with them. We started with the company. So, and then, things came, they were my first check along with another friend of mine from business school who was from China. He had never done cannabis, never done CBD, never done any drugs, but he was listening carefully to, sort of the ideas I was saying. And he was like, you know what, I think you know what you're doing. So here's another check. And that's how we got started.
Wow.
officially. And then, we've gone down the path of, the initial focus was cannabinoids because, again, CBD was still very expensive. Now CBD is obviously very cheap. I mean, you can get it for a few $100s a kilogram, and because of all the production and things that have come online, there has been changes in strains where now the strain itself produces more. But from that point, we thought, you know what, there's not just CBD that has this issue. There's also psychedelics. There's also other nutraceuticals like anti-aging molecules, peptides, things
yeah.
like that. So that's why, we decided that this is the lowest carbon usage production method for making anything on the planet. Once the fermentation pathway is set in the yeast, each crop only takes 5 days. So each fermentation is only 5 days. So every 5 days, you can basically get a new crop. There's very little labor, very little water involved. So from a resource usage perspective and a cost of kilogram perspective, we believe that this is the cheapest way to go. So anyway, so that was sort of how the idea
That's
was
awesome.
born with, not only can we make medicines or important molecules, but now we can make other things as well.
Are a lot of people utilizing yeast to do this stuff? Because when I met you, I'm obviously not in the biochemistry
Right.
space, right? But the concept of utilizing yeast
Right.
to make these biopharmaceuticals, if you will,
Right.
like I've never even would have thought about that.
So yes, the answer is yes. There are many different companies that have been over the years focused on creating all sorts of molecules using yeast. I think in the beginning it was more like biofuels was a big focus. Unfortunately, most of those companies didn't work. And here's the reason why. The reason is biotechnology inherently is a very expensive venture. I mean, we're talking about millions of dollars to engineer just a single strain of yeast. The biggest cost on average of biotech companies, biggest cost of 70%, maybe even 75% is labor. We're talking about highly specialized people that have PhDs, 10 years experience in the business.
Yeah.
So your average PhD is going to cost you $8,000 to $10,000 a month. And then there's benefits and things
Yeah.
like that. So because it's a very highly specialized thing, it takes a lot of money to engineer that.
So I don't want to ask like too dumb of a question here, but when I think of yeast, I think of yeast that makes bread.
Yes.
Right.
And kombucha.
And
Because-
kombucha.
Because
Right.
I homebrew
Right.
kombucha.
Right.
Yeah.
For the health benefits,
Right.
and we love it. So
Yeah.
that's what we're used to. is-
So when you say it costs a lot of money to develop new
Yes.
forms of yeast, so not all yeast is created the same.
Yes. So yeast can make beer, wine, kombucha, bread.
Yeah.
So what we do is, so think of it this way. So normally a strain of yeast that makes beer or wine, right? The yeast is naturally, through evolution, is programmed to eat sugar, take the sugar through different steps, convert it enzymatically into alcohol. That's what yeast naturally does.
Yeah.
Now, what we do is we go into the genome or the genetics of the yeast and through the chromosomes themselves. We snip out the genetics that make the alcohol itself, and now we redirect that whole sugar pathway or the flow of sugar like a pipe or with water in it and we add new genes. So we snipped out the genes from cannabis. We snipped out the genes from psilocybe cubensis and other funguses and plants, and now we replaced it with that. So now when the sugar flows through the yeast, it actually produces those particular molecules.
It's a little
That's
bit more
amazing.
sophisticated than my home
Than your
kombucha
home.
brewing, which I brew with no alcohol.
Right.
FYI for anyone curious about that.
And everybody meet our property cat.
Yeah.
This guy.
We're still
Girl.
taking votes on names.
Yeah.
I think.
I think we voted on Wick.
Wick?
Yeah,
Wick.
because she turns into a killer when dogs come around.
Ooh.
Like John
Like
Wick.
John Wick.
Yeah, she does. She's a dog eater.
Wow.
Yeah, don't
She
be
turns
fooled
into a panther.
by her
If a
sweetness.
dog comes around, she will. We've literally seen her attack a full-grown pure-blood pit bull, and the pit bull ran off scared.
Wow.
Like, tail
it
between
gave-
its legs.
Yep.
No joke.
It was crazy.
Yeah,
But
she is the dog eater.
yep. So all right. So
Hey, girl.
that's amazing. First of all.
Thank you.
And yeah, I don't even have words. You're way smarter than me, so it is what it is.
We love to hang out with people.
yeah,
smarter than us.
totally,
That's
totally.
what we do. That's
Exactly.
how we roll. But we love him, and he's a good spirit. So.
Thank you.
So what you do, let's kind of go to our conversation a little bit that we had
Sure.
at dinner the other
The
night.
one that made you come home and say, "Oh my gosh, we need to have a conversation with
Yes,
Sarah
exactly.
on camera."
Exactly.
Yes. Okay, that one. Let's go with that
So basically, kind of going back to where I was starting here is just saying, okay, Hannah and I have a deep reverence, I'll say, for the impact that plant medicines can make on people's lives.
Right.
Now, I've gone this full gamut. I guess we both have. But when I first got into this world of utilizing plant medicine for my healing, and Hannah was doing the same, I kind of had my heels dug into the ground about if I'm going to do any kind of psychedelic, it's going to be earth-driven.
Right.
It's going to be ayahuasca, maybe psilocybin,
Right.
bufo, whatever it is. It's going to come
From the
from nature.
Sonoran desert
It's
toad.
Sonoran desert toad.
plant.
Yep, it's going to come from the plant. It's going to be derived. It's going to be natural. It's going to be done ceremonially with very specific intent, with a shaman or a
Right.
taita or a
Right.
maestro or somebody.
He's a little stubborn about
And
these things.
Right.
and because I just believe, we both believe, like there has to be the healing, the difference in the way that we kind of quantify it, the difference between a drug and a medicine is, are you utilizing it to escape, or are
Right.
you utilizing it to go internal and heal?
Right. Makes
And
sense.
and so when we were talking about it the other day, I asked you a question, like, how do you reconcile
Right.
the fact that you're doing a lot of biosynthetics,
Right.
and it's not plant driven? Like, where is the spirituality in this?
Right.
Where is all this? Because to me, that's a big part of it. Like,
Right,
and
right.
doing ayahuasca for me made a huge.
Right.
It really changed or enhanced my spiritual view of the world.
Right.
And so my fear originally was, when we go the synthetic route, what does that do to the
Sure.
whole
energetics.
space, the whole energetics behind it all, right?
Yeah.
And so your answer was amazing. So could you talk about kind of like your perspective on why you do what you do,
Sure.
what your mission is behind it all,
Sure.
and how you think it can help humanity heal?
Sure.
Since we're talking about helping people heal, grow, and thrive.
Absolutely. So I think fundamentally, imagine when penicillin was first discovered.
Yeah.
Penicillin was discovered accidentally by somebody who ate moldy bread.
Yeah.
Right? And then they realized, like, hey, if you have some sort of an infection or something, this is something that's going to heal that. Or it's
Anyone
going
who's
to
ever watched or read the Outlander series,
Right.
the book series,
Yes.
just saying that's how we learned this.
Right.
I learned this from Claire in the Outlander series. Not my biology
Very
teacher,
deep.
Right.
bless her heart.
Right.
But anyway.
So imagine if after we discovered that moldy bread heals people and it makes them feel better. Now imagine if and again, this is just a perspective, right? Imagine if we said, okay, moldy bread heals things or people, and from now on, everybody who's going to get sick is going to eat moldy bread, period. And we never evolved from that point to now where we have such complex antibiotics. So that's one perspective that I think for me really works, right? It sort of puts it into context. Now, if you apply that same thing to psychedelics, yes, nature has given us psychedelics. They're amazing. They're beautiful. But, we are taking what nature has given us and we are improving it. We're taking the moldy bread and now we are making very targeted therapeutics and therapies that have specific outcomes. In addition to being able to make what our nature has already given us more efficiently, which in my opinion actually helps nature, right? If you, for example, if typical cannabis plant in the later stages is going to take 5 gallons of water a day for months on end, and then there's labor involved. So now think about what that does to like the total resource usage of the planet. Now, if you can make that within 5 days with like way less water and other resources and labor, I think that's helping the planet. But thinking about it along those lines now. If we take let's take a case example like mushrooms, right? So if you take mushrooms, now you have a 6 hour, 7 to 8 hour hallucination. Some people may not be okay with that, or some people may not have that amount of time, or some people may just want something that's not a microdose, that's a macrodose, but without all that because of whatever reason that they may want.
Or maybe the feeling of getting nauseous and having your body process it.
Exactly,
And like
the butterflies
that might.
Butterflies in your stomach or other anxiety or stuff. So what we're working on actively at the moment is being able to take these natural molecules and now being able to slightly tweak them, just like we had penicillin, right? If today we have dozens of different types of antibiotics and they're very specific in their outcome. But if we, let's say, just stuck with moldy bread or just penicillin, it would not be effective at all for all sorts of infections and bacteria and other issues. So we're taking that same concept and we're applying it to not only psychedelics, cannabis, but other molecules where, what if we could engineer, let's say, the molecule of LSD that instead of, a 14-hour hallucination, it has a 1-hour hallucination. What if there's no hallucination at all? What if the effects are even better than what psilocybin or psilocin or CBD could offer? So we're not saying that is the outcome of everything, but we're saying that let's take that initial step to learn more, to find out whether there's something out there or not. So that's sort of the goal.
Okay, and so the one thing that resonated with me in our conversation the other night was, we've both done bufo.
Yes.
From the Sonoran Desert Toad.
Yes.
And when you use bufo, it's very hard to control the dosage amount.
Right.
The burn rate changes, the way you measure it,
Right.
the excretion from the actual toad
Right.
matters,
Right.
As far as the concentration or whatever of the psychedelic molecule, right?
And we've even heard what's happening in the toad's life if they're
Yeah.
being maltreated in
Right.
the excretion, as it's happening.
Yeah.
The energy of the toad as it's having that
Right.
experience
Right.
is going to change the actual molecule that's excreted by
And
them.
so it's hard to
Yeah.
create a predictable experience because of the fact that
Right.
you have all these variables that are just
Right.
quite frankly almost virtually impossible to
Right,
control.
right.
So by creating and isolating this biochemical chemical
Right.
5-MeO DMT molecule, you're able to put it into a form where you can create a controlled, predictable result, and you're helping the toads, and you're able to give an experience. And because of the fact that I've done both versions of it and understand the difference between the experiences, and know what that's like, it made sense for me. And so, can you speak to that at all? Like,
yeah. So one of the first images that I saw of 5-MeO extraction was a toad that was hung up, like with all four of its appendages, like the legs and arms were like hung up like this.
No way.
And that was, I don't know, I'm sure like a lot of people do it like in a nicer way. Most people probably like extract it in a nicer way, but that. So the first thing that came to my mind when I saw something like that is, what is this? I mean, we are embarking on a spiritual journey by torturing the very
Little
animal, and that's giving us the medicine. So that was my first thought that came to mind, right? Or for example, there's many psychedelics out there that come from plants and yeast, and now people have just taken so much that those may become rare. So those were the first two thoughts that came to my mind. Like, you think the toad wants to be here? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Right. The second part that you touched up on, which I think actually, by the way, is a great point, is every excretion or extraction of medicine is different. And this, by the way, is not only just in 5-MeO, this is across the spectrum. So one of the problems this is what I learned from the cannabis industry way back in the day, is you have a plant of cannabis, right? Just one plant. There are many buds that grow around. There's the top bud, the side bud, the bottom bud, right? Now, within the same plant, if you take the top bud and you take a bud from the bottom and you put them through, an LCMS or a GCMS, which is the instruments that do testing, that tell you what percentage of CBD, THC is in there, within the same plant, you will find out that the top bud is up to 5%, let's say, more THC than the bottom bud. And now we're talking about the same plant. Now imagine you have 1,000 plants of the same strain.
In different crops.
Right, different crops. Can you imagine
Right.
how much of a nightmare that would create for standardization? And because this comes back into what you originally said, is that there has to be some sort of a standardization when we talk about, or when we do, for example, pretty much any drug. I mean, you look at antibiotics, for example, and if you have a bread that has a little bit more, penicillin in it versus less, how would that affect healing, or how would that affect somebody getting better from an infection? So that carries on in pretty much anything that comes from nature. It is meant to be variable, and that's just the outcome of evolution and how genetics work. So this problem, I think, is one of the core problems in the industry, which is that one may be different from the other, and that's just if you had the natural plant or the natural toad in its natural setting. Now, take that and multiply that with, let's say, unsustainable or cruel ways of extraction, right? Like with the toad being hung up, or maybe the plants are not taken care of. Well, that creates a whole range of possibilities. Sometimes in nature, if the animal or the plant is not taken care well of, they will create more toxins, right? So thinking about it along those lines, I think there's a place for every type of process or method of healing. It's another thing we talked about the other night, right? Which is, I definitely believe there's a huge place for going the traditional method of going out into the jungle with a shaman and going through the whole spiritual process in the way that it is. But having said that, there is also a place for a more targeted approach, a more controlled approach,
Almost clinical.
In a clinical side, because I think there's a place for it in terms of some people may find one effective and the other ineffective. So we have to, if we're going to talk about treating a whole population of people that have PTSD or treatment-resistant depression, which is hundreds and millions of people, probably might even be billions actually, can one type of therapy work for everybody? And I'm just going to, or one type of ceremony work for everybody? So that, I think, is one thing. The second thing I think about, and we brought it up to dinner, is that going out to a retreat, going out to, let's say, the Amazonian jungle, is fortunately or unfortunately is something that a privileged or a semi-privileged person can do. Not everybody is able to spend that kind of money to be able to, or even take that many days away from work. And the third thing is, even if everybody had the money and the time to do it, there may be a saturation point. I mean, how many people can the Amazon rainforest hold?
That's
Or your center, for example. And by the way, lovely place, mind blown away. I'm
you.
serious. I've never seen anything like it, and the vibe and everything. But how many people can you guys really host? Like, if there's a bus,
Yeah,
few
we're
buses
limited.
of 1,000 people.
We're limited. We could
tomorrow,
take like
right?
30 people a week times
Exactly.
52 weeks. It's like literally limited to like 1,500 people a year.
Exactly. So my idea is, or my thought about this is, like, yes, that is, in my opinion, probably the best way to do it, right? To be having that spiritual guidance, that connection, and for the people that can have the time and money and be able to do that. But while we wait for, that to happen, and for all the people in the world to go through that, there are still hundreds and millions of people out there that are suffering. So the question is, do we hold on to that concept of how the medicine should be administered, and for those 10, 15 years until you have vacancy, or the next center has vacancy, do we let those people silently suffer? Or do we go this alternative way, which is to use nature itself to be able to bring down the prices, and the availability? Because in a lot of cases, it's not about prices; it's about there just isn't enough. Like, look at ibogaine, look at all these other substances.
Yeah.
And can we bring that out to the masses, so while they wait, we can still push out some healing and some wellness for the people?
So that's all amazing. I love that. And I would just add to this, just to make it really abundantly clear for everybody who's watching and listening, is that, and I know you believe this because it was involved in our conversation the other day, is the set and setting are really important, regardless of whether you're doing it in the jungle, where it's really easy. Obviously, the setting is kind of curated for you. The mindset is going to be cultivated by the group, the community, the shaman, whatever. So when you do it in the ways that we're able to create now, there just becomes a greater level of responsibility on you cultivating your own setting and your own mindset,
And
and
by
doing
you mean the
end user, the person doing it. If you're going to go through
person working with the medicine.
right, the person working through the medicine has to go through this process and make sure that the setting is proper, make sure their mindset and their intentions are right, that they're going inside. It's not being used recreationally, that their integration work, because we've done psychedelics. It's not, the journey is one thing. The life-changing stuff happens through the integration on the backside of that. And I think one of the challenges of psychedelic usage is people thinking that the medicine is just going to heal them. The medicine it's not a pharmaceutical, right? And so, do you have any experience in all this stuff with that?
Absolutely, and I will actually share my first psychedelics experience my whole life, because this ties into it. But yeah, I think set and setting is probably as important as the molecule itself. And I think right now, where this pharmaceutical approach is going, I do think they need a lot more work as to how they're. So, for example, yes, there's a huge difference between doing it this way and, let's say, sitting in a clinic with a doctor or a nurse you don't know and going through that. So I don't think that's. I personally don't think it's the best way.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, but again, I think it can always be improved on, and I think as time goes along, that will improve. But I'll share my personal psychedelic story. So I was in UC Davis doing my biochemistry degree first year, moved to the US alone by myself. And I was I was hanging out at a friend's place. It's about 2 a.m. or something like that, and we're just watching TV and whatnot. And my friend's roommate, she comes back home from work around 2:30 a.m. and she says, "Hey, I have some LSD. You want to try it?" And back then, I'm ashamed to admit it, but back then I had no idea what LSD did. Right? So I was like,
You're a biochemist. I didn't know what LSD did.
But I didn't. It was just a new thing.
All right,
I was.
cool.
I
They
was.
don't teach you that in undergrad chemistry classes.
And this is just first year of biochemistry,
Okay,
right?
okay, so-
first year, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, in my mind, the thought process that went was, okay, whatever. This is sort of like maybe cannabis or whatever. Let's take 3 tabs.
Oh no!
This is my first time. This is a true story. So this is about 3:30 a.m. now, and I'm thinking, I don't feel anything. I want my money back. We got scammed, right, or something, right? And then something really hit me. And I remember I was lying in bed, and there's a popcorn ceiling, in the dorm room where I was. So I'm lying in bed. I look up, and all of a sudden, I see, those old scrolls of like pictures that show ancient wars and stuff like that happening. So I saw an ancient scroll being the video and the scroll being imprinted into the ceiling in real time of an ancient Mughal emperor and king, and him like going through his life and fighting wars.
Okay.
All 24 karat gold plating on the popcorn roof.
That's kind of cool.
While
Projecting in
I'm
your
lying
mind's eye.
down.
All right.
And then I was like, what is this? And that's when I realized, okay, it hit me. And then I spent the next 16 hours, or maybe it was a little longer, with my friend, with the two of us. We were in the room.
16 hours?
16 hours, I believe. It was
Oh
16
my
hours.
gosh.
And again, I had no idea what. So, but having said that, I think it was cool that I went into this experience without actually knowing what to expect. Because a lot of times, you talk to people that do psychedelics, and I talk to a lot of people who do psychedelics, is they already have an idea. And I think when you have a preconceived notion
100%.
about what something might do, that actually fundamentally changes your experience. Now think about quantum mechanics, right? Is like the observer changes the outcome of the experiment.
100%.
And in that way, so then I had that cool thing. It totally blew my mind. Then I'm like, then we go out for a long walk, and I'm looking at the clouds, and the clouds are dancing with each other. And I was
awesome.
never really into animals or plants or like insects. But that day, I was stalking an ant for about an hour, like watching it do stuff, and then following it like where his house is. And the ant was probably creeped out. He's like, "Who is this guy? What does he want?" And then reflections and things like that. But to this day, I'm maybe I shouldn't say my age, but whatever. I'm 38 and a half, and I was, I think, 17 and a half or 18 back then. But to this day, that was the most profound, the most beautiful day of my life. And I've done acid a few times after that, and then other psychedelics. But that was my first introduction to psychedelics. That was my first, trip, and that fundamentally changed my view about life itself. Like now, I'm a big nerd on I watch nature documentaries. I love to appreciate and learn more about plants and things like that. And again, the point where I'm going with this is there was no set, there was no setting. It was literally in a dorm room, and then we walked around. Yes, I think it would have been much better if we had, a proper setting to be able to do that. But I think, maybe it didn't give me the 100% healing or effectiveness, but profoundly that changed my life. And partly why I'm even sitting here in front of you is probably because of that day. Because I was coming to the US to become a doctor, which is what every family from where we come from wants, and that was my plan. But I think that day made me think about my life again.
So what I'm hearing from you is the conversation around perfectionism. And like so many of us that are
Right.
high achievers, overachievers,
Right.
We were maybe in a time in our lives status oriented, perfectionists. It has to be all or nothing.
Right.
Extreme thinking, idealist, extreme thinking. Either I'm amazing or I'm a POS. Either
Right.
I am going to change the world, or screw it, I'm just going to sit on the couch and
Right.
eat bonbons every day,
Right.
right? Or I'm going to produce the best thing in the world, or
Right.
not do it at all.
Right.
And what I'm hearing from you in your share around this is that any use of psychedelics, what I'm now calling sacred medicine,
Sure.
because it incorporates plant medicine, animal medicine,
Right.
fungus and orange toad, as well as these
Right.
biosynthetics.
Right.
I'm sure I didn't coin that myself. I'm sure I read that somewhere. So if I stole that from you out there in the ether, I give you credit, I guess.
Right.
Drop your name if I took that from you. I don't know. I would love to give credit. I don't know where I took it. But it's really what I'm hearing is a shift away from perfectionism.
Right.
And it's better to do something imperfectly than it is to not do something at all.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of conversation in the space right now about safe use of psychedelics as we're approaching the psychedelic renaissance. And what should the regulations around it look like? Should it be an all-natural source or a synthetic source? And what I'm
Right.
hearing is this overarching concept of let's drop the perfectionism, because
Right.
even less than perfect with regulation, with
Right.
methodology, with use, with set, which is mindset. If you're new to this space, the set is mindset, how you're approaching it, and the setting is where and with whom, and what's around you when you are. even less than ideal in any of those categories is still better than not using these medicines, as I call them. I don't call them drugs because I believe that they are, with intentionality, we lean into them and they make a change within us, in our spirit, in our soul, in our mind, in our neurology. And so that's what I'm taking. Am I picking that up correctly from you, or how else can you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my definition of a drug is anything that alters your perception in any way. So I consider caffeine a drug. So I think people all around the world take drugs in the form of coffee and tea. Cigarettes and maybe even some supplements can be considered drugs. But yes, I agree. Like, I think there's some book I was reading that says make one small change. And if you make one small change every day, that's, to the power of 365, that's still 37%.
Atomic
So you have-
Habits.
Habits.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Yeah.
so in that way, and I agree. Like, I think one of the things that I've come across in the psychedelic space is that people have a either black or white approach to how it should go. And my view is nothing in life is ever black and white, right? There's always a spectrum. So we all have to figure out where on that spectrum we land, and sometimes it may not be what we want, right? But coming back to my experience, like, yes, I would not trade that experience hands down, because if I didn't have that experience, I would not be here, and that's just the start of the journey.
That's interesting. I've never had an experience like that. Like, I've
Right.
always been so much of a control freak
Right.
and honestly fearful. My
Right.
first mind altering substance that I ever did was ayahuasca.
Wow, you went from 0 to 100 real quick.
Yeah.
Talk about all or nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, but I because I had the reverence for it and
Right.
the respect
Right.
and the fear, quite frankly, of it.
Right.
I wanted to be in an environment that we were safe and that we were looked after and
Right.
that it was a spiritual experience, not just a dorm room experience. And listen, I just never did that. Like, all my friends did. I was just doing other things at the time. And
But are you glad that you avoided that as a dorm room experience, or if you went back, would you wish that you had?
It's a great question.
that is a good question. I guess I am glad because of who I am, and I guess I can now say that I'm glad I didn't have that, but I can also say that without judgment to anybody else who has had that,
Yeah.
right? And I would say now that maybe delving into opening up a little bit might be okay, simply because I'm a different person and I'm able to handle it. But I think starting in that place while it could have benefits,
Right.
if you have the opportunity, if we're going to talk about optimization, if you will,
Right.
is starting in that way
Right.
might not be optimal, right?
I completely
right?
agree, by the way.
And
I
it's
completely
cool that
agree.
you did it
Yeah.
and you had a
Yeah.
great experience and it changed your life.
Right.
But we could also have conversations about people that have done had other experiences.
Suboptimal.
And
Absolutely,
Hannah,
absolutely.
actually, we were talking about this the other day, and I'd be curious to hear your feedback because you
Right.
obviously know more about this, probably clinical side of the
Right.
the effects of like an LSD, for example, of people that get their brains fried and people that do too much, or people
Right.
like. Do you have any kind of insight as to like what the actual bio effect is on the human body and the brain
Right.
with doing stuff like this?
Yeah, so I think even for cannabis, for example, there is a certain subsect of the population which has genetically been shown that their genes have a certain precondition where cannabis use could lead to psychosis. But that's a very small handful of population, and I think the same goes for pretty much any other psychedelic. I mean, I've known people that have done mushrooms, and it like kind of went the other way around.
Yeah.
So yes, coming back to your point is, yes, I think there is a little bit of a carelessness that went into, for example, me just going into it in the dorm room, right? And fortunately for me, it didn't, have any of those adverse effects, because then I wouldn't be here in the first place.
Right.
But yeah, I do think that yes, things could be done more responsibly. But yes, there is a subset of population that may not feel the same healing, may not feel the same effects, and I think even to this day, it's a little unclear, even from the scientific community, as to how you gauge that in a person. So it's almost like you kind of have to jump, you have
you
to kind
gotta-
of jump in the water and then see if you're going to sink or swim.
But
Yeah.
is it irreparable damage that is caused when that happens though? Is it permanent brain damage or psychosis that is irreversible, for example? How dangerous are we talking
Right.
about in that population?
I think
not?
number one, it depends on what substance. Number two, I think it depends on the person. And again, what I'm about to say, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm just a biochemist. So
Yeah.
I disclaimer here that obviously this is just my opinion.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
For all it matters, it could be completely wrong. But I think that I don't think there's any brain damage in particular that happens. In fact, all the studies that I've seen on cannabis and psychedelics, I mean, there's studies that show that mushrooms are even less harmful than cigarettes and alcohol, right? So I think what I do think that there is the psychological damage potentially that can happen, and I don't really know too much about that, but I have seen that. But having said that, there are people that are completely affected by it, but there is that danger. What I don't want people to think, and it's my personal opinion, is that don't take psychedelics lightly, right? I mean, psychedelics
Totally.
are something that you need to think about 3 or 4 times. Don't do what I did. So for all the people out there, don't do what I did, even though it worked out for me. But again, it may not be the
Yeah,
same
you
for
kind of
people.
got lucky a little.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You had a question?
I did.
I mean, it's just, to me, it's a fascinating conversation around the use of them and the impact and the responsibility. And I guess what you just said is just using LSD as an example, right? I still to this day have never done LSD.
Wow.
And I think some of it is just around the fact that it's a synthetic, right? It's a bio, not even bio, right? It's just a chemically created compound,
Right.
effectively. Maybe I'm using the wrong terms. Is that accurate?
No, that is correct.
Okay.
It is. So LSD comes from LSA,
Okay.
and basically these are derivatives of ergot fungus, which actually grows on wheat. So
Okay.
for thousands of years, people have unintentionally and then intentionally been tripping on something that's similar to LSD, which was the ergot rye fungus, which is sort of the building block molecule, which you process a few more steps to get LSD. So the trip from that actually is a lot worse. So I would
Okay.
not recommend anybody to even
Try it.
curiously try it. But no, I think it's a very fair question and a thought that it is not a natural molecule. So is there a place for this in the natural feeling? My viewpoint, and again, this is just my viewpoint, is that anything that benefits someone or has a potential benefit has a place in our society and in the process of healing.
Okay.
Because natural is one thing. Another thing is, I mean, what is the whole point of psychedelics or medicine? The end goal, the destination is healing or a better understanding. So if we're able to get there by doing this, then more power to it. Like, for example, naturally human beings can only run or walk or maybe take a horse. Now we have airplanes, right?
Yeah.
So that would be the way I would think about it.
That's cool. So with that, I mean, and it's the same thing. I mean, at this point in time, LSD is a very controlled
Absolutely.
molecule. Like and I've heard this from people, even though I've never done it. It's like when they do an LSD journey, trip, whatever you want to call it, they kind of know what they're getting into ahead of time.
Right.
Whereas when I do an ayahuasca journey, when we go down into the jungle, like I have no idea what the hell I'm getting involved with
Right.
every single time we do it.
Right.
And that's scary as hell. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Whereas like with LSD, if you did it on a regular basis, I'm not saying do it all the time, by the way. I'm just saying if you had a practice and a medicine and like a protocol that you wanted to go through,
Right.
you could kind of learn to work with it
Right.
a little bit. And you could utilize it very intentionally for healing.
Absolutely.
I'm never going to advocate for raving with it or
Absolutely.
going out and partying just to let loose. I guess I should never say never, but
Right.
I have a hard time visualizing being okay with that. So I mean, it's just fascinating. So do you, like, how many people do what you do? I guess that's like going through my mind, like
Right.
We haven't told the audience who exactly he is. Like what that
Cher, who are you?
heard the
Another
origin
guy.
story.
I'm just a guy.
But you do run now one of the largest, if not the largest, psychedelic. How do you phrase
Sure.
it?
So very
Labs
quickly,
in the world?
yes. So we have a biotech company in San Diego, and the idea is to make natural molecules and other products using the least wasteful way, which we believe is using biotechnology solutions to produce stuff. So, for example, we got started about 8 years ago to make CBD because CBD was very expensive.
Yeah.
Then we made other cannabinoids. Then we got into Y Combinator, and we met people there who had done psychedelics and were talking about it. And from our previous experience, we said, hey, why don't we do this as a cool project on the side? I mean, that's literally how we got into psychedelics. We spent a little bit of our money, and then we let the world know about it. That got us, the attention of some of the leaders in the pharmaceutical psychedelic space, and then we started working with them. But since then, we've expanded our portfolio into other things like animal-free leather, right? We've made animal fat that tastes and exists exactly like bacon fat, but it comes from yeast. So something that maybe vegans could try.
So it's like
right?
vegan
animal fat. And
how does our body process that though?
That is something that we haven't actually looked into because we stay more on the development side more so than the clinical side. We've made natural food colorings, like taken the red from tomatoes, the orange from carrots, the purple from beets. So you may have heard of the red dye ban that happened recently. Those molecules are carcinogenic. Here we have an alternative that not only is sustainably made, B, it's also an antioxidant, and it's also a food coloring. So we made essences of...
That's a big
That's
deal.
awesome.
Because we're trying so hard, just on that point alone, to get out the red, the blue, these really, really toxic food colorings that are absolutely rampant, especially in the kid world.
I was going to say, especially with our
in
kids,
the kids
this is a
world,
big deal.
with the candies, with the cupcakes, and the brighter the better.
The ice creams.
The ice cream. It is horrendous, and yet even
frozen
when
ices.
we explain this to our kids, and we're like, "This is why we'll bring natural cookies to the party." Like we're the weird parents.
Right.
That I'll be like, "I really don't want you eating these food dyes."
Right.
And then one of our kids loves to bake, and she's like, "Mama, the only other option out there is this stuff that's 10 times more expensive."
Right.
And it's this gel, and it changes the consistency of what I'm baking with.
Right.
And it's hard to get. And so that alone is an entire worth an entire conversation.
Absolutely.
About how are you? What is their plan to make that mainstream? If you're able to pull the coloring out of natural ingredients and make it mainstream, that could literally stop the use of these horrendously, they call them endocrine disruptors, right?
Absolutely.
They're carcinogenic, they're endocrine disruptors, which means that the reproductive capabilities of our children are actually being altered, massively affected by the use of these red and all of the food colorings.
Right.
You have a solution to this? Holy grail, man, tell us more. And how does it become mainstream?
So the challenge, I think you brought a very amazing question, which none of the other people that I've sat down with have asked me, is how do you bring this to the mainstream? So the challenge is that there are two sides to things or business or sustainability and innovation in the world. One is the actual impact that you're making, right? Which is, hey, now we've made a way to create this thing and it's an antioxidant. In fact, the food coloring is good for you. The second part is...
What? I have a whole tribe of moms. I'm just letting you know this right now. Every single...
They will champion your effort.
Yeah, health conscious mom in the world. You will have an army of us who are please help us not put this toxic shit into our kids' bodies anymore. We will help you if this is an option.
So
you know. You're not alone in this, bro.
I appreciate
We're
it.
here. Help us help you.
Help
us help you.
So the real challenge that we have faced as a company is that what we've learned, because we've been doing a lot of business development, go out to food companies, go out to fashion companies that make leather products, go out to companies that are harvesting essences, and we've even made stuff like retinol, which goes into cosmetics, and other things that come from shark's fins and whatnot. The challenge we fundamentally see is every business that we talk to, or most businesses we talk to, they have these sustainability statements and whatnot. Guess what? They don't really give a shit. I don't want to say it like that, but that's the truth. For them, it's all about the bottom line. And for them, it's all about, hey, we can get chemically made retinol from China that's $50 a kilogram or $80 a kilogram. Your retinol is going to cost more than that. So why would we go? So to come back to your food coloring thing, what we have realized is that a lot of companies will pretend it's all about sustainability, and maybe it is, but from their perspective, the biggest thing is the bottom line. And the sustainability argument from at least the brands and people that we've talked to, does not overshadow the bottom line of the cash. Overshadows by a huge margin the other stuff. So that is a place that we need help with, right? Which is to talk to people or people that would be willing to help us with that. But that's definitely a big issue right now.
But it's about production, right? So if you're talking about food coloring, for instance, as an example, obviously chemical food coloring right now is rampant. And you go to every grocery store across America and you're going to find food coloring that's toxic.
Right.
And so therefore the production of it is scaled and the infrastructure is there, so it's going to be cheaper. So there's going to be a time, like with everything, where it's going to be more expensive until the adoption is more widespread of utilizing this and people's consciousness and use of it.
And one thing that raises that consciousness is if there's 5 boxes of food coloring that are $1.50 for those little 4 toxic little tube things, right? And then there's one that might be 3 times more expensive, but it legit is all natural. It's not going to change. And it spells the benefits of that, and it might be 3 times more. There is a market for that product, right?
Yeah.
And so there is it's like we all know a few brands. 7th Generation started out being, we're from Vermont, right? And they were from there. They are more expensive than the non-natural brands, but there is a population that's willing to pay a premium to have that product.
Absolutely.
And the minute that you get even just the placement on the shelf next to the toxic shit, it's planting that seed for people of, why would it need to exist?
Right.
There has to be a thinking population that the alternative being there.
Right.
So I'm picturing a company
Do you know what
called
I'm
"Don't
saying?
Kill Your Kid Food Coloring."
Don't kill your kid.
I mean, it would be a hell of a marketing campaign. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, like in the comments, I feel like there is going to be someone who's like, I want to own and run the company. Don't kill your kid food coloring, and they're going to want to source this from you, and we're going to replicate it. And it doesn't need to be the most productive. It doesn't need to be the highest volume. Doesn't need to be the greatest margins of profitability. No, but there are people out there that have the mission.
Absolutely.
And they need to know about the things that you're creating so that, Jessica Alba, for example, I'm hoping she's one of the good ones.
Right.
And don't tell me otherwise. La, 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 la.
La, la.
She's one of the mom heroes who created the Honest Company. Because she didn't want that stuff. Even the bath bubbles that are coating your skin of their babies with toxic chemicals.
Sunscreen.
And she said, sunscreen, I want to do it differently. So I'm hoping that there are brands that are willing to upcharge or reduce their margin of profitability in order to use the products like you have to offer.
You've brought something that I think is maybe a 10-hour conversation, but I'll keep my view on this short, which is
kind of what we do.
There's a couple different things happening simultaneously. It's almost like if you look at like gears in a watch, right? So in the market, to get a product out to market, you need a couple of things. So unfortunately, I'm no Jessica Alba. I don't have that sort of presence. I'm barely on social media, by the way. I don't even have I have an Instagram account I haven't used in 2 or 3.
I know it's private. I tried to friend you yesterday. So you go on.
I deleted the app, by the way, so it's out there. But I mean, I'm just trying to.
So he's not going to accept your friend request.
I won't. And I'm glad to know. So
For
I won't
you, I'll
take it
download
personally.
it again. I will download it.
I was going to have to
I will
hold her
download
as she
it.
cried to sleep tomorrow because you haven't accepted her request
I
yet.
know, a little therapy.
But so number one, I try not to stay on social media because I feel like a lot of it is not real, and I don't want that to impact my brain and sort of like go in that materialism sort of a journey because I see a lot. So anyway, but coming back to the idea of why what we have is already not out there. So number one, I'm not a celebrity, or I'm just an ordinary guy who just had this idea and we're trying to do this. Number two, going from where we are today, for example, and we'll just take food coloring as an example, we would want to be competitive in the market against red dye 40 or red dye 3 or yellow cancer tomorrow. We would have to, have a good amount of investment put in to be able to scale that up. We are a Y Combinator company. We have raised money and we've been making revenues for 4 years. But, the environment for this is ever changing. And because we are not a one product company, getting an investor to wrap their head around the whole ecosystem of what we do, because, my vision is We just want to reinvent supply chains and make everything more sustainable and make things that can help the planet and people. I think you guys get it, which is why I'm here.
Yeah,
But
totally.
not everybody thinks that way. Most investors you talk to are all about, okay, well, show me the ROI. I mean, we have all that stuff, but which is funny because there's people like Sam Bankman-Fried, for example, that didn't even have a spreadsheet or accounting, and people are giving them $200 million, right? So everybody's journey is different. But so far, it's been a challenge for us to for people to even buy into like what exactly we're doing, and then B, for getting those resources pooled behind us. But yes, in an ideal world, this is where we would want to go. And I can say that if we had those resources, let's say just to scale up the production for food colorings, we could actually get to a point where it would be price competitive. And I'll give you another example. We work with we work with, for example, a couple different psychedelic companies, some of the largest ones. Without specifically going into which particular
Yeah.
molecule because of agreements and stuff that we have, I'll just say that there are particular molecules that are very rare, that are very very therapeutic, that because of their rarity and their sourcing can go up to almost $200,000 to $300,000 a kilo. And that's just the going rate for some of these particular specialty chemicals, or specialty molecules or therapeutics, we'll say. With this process of bioengineering and sort of what we do in the lab, we are now bringing that down to roughly about 3 to 4 thousand a kilo. I mean, that is just one example. I mean, it is more on the extremer side of things, but I just wanted to show you the potential. So here you have one process to make something that's what, $250,000 a kilogram.
Yeah.
Now with this process and scaling up, and of course it's going to take millions of dollars to get to that
Yeah,
point,
of
right?
course.
But once and a year or 2 years, depending on the complexity and depending on the scale you're looking to go to, but that potential is there. So now you have something that's made in the most sustainably way possible. This technology allows us to make infinite amounts. So now there is no constraint on how much of it is even available in the world. The crop of the yeast
Yeah.
every crop is harvested 5 days. You keep that with multiple bioreactors in parallel. Theoretically, you could have infinite product. The other thing it allows you to do is when you harvest, from the biggest problem in the cannabis industry was, and always will be, is pesticides and heavy metals. That can never be changed, even with testing. You test for 60 pesticides today, which is what California is currently doing. I think it may have increased. People will invent new pesticides. So you're always playing a catch-up game. So even
Yeah,
today,
that's always the
products
way it
are
is.
tainted. So we can get to a point where we can make more sustainable medicine that is purer, free of contaminants, and even cheaper than what is currently available today. The gap from here to here, that bridge is being able to get the funding to be able to go there. So I do believe so. I'm an optimist about the future, and I do believe that one day these things will become more mainstream because the way that we're working on the planet with making anything is frankly not very sustainable for most of the things. Of course, some things have been optimized for that, but I think it will eventually hit a tipping point where it's either going to be we have to switch to something like this, or people are not going to be able to get what they get. But that's definitely a big point.
So, pivoting a little bit in terms of the availability and your mass production capability that you are able to, because of the yeast, and
Yes.
how you make that work. It brings up the question to me of sort of the overall, is just because we can, should we?
Right.
And, as a person who has put myself out there as a recovery advocate,
Right.
I mentioned to you,
Right.
I'm free of alcohol and drugs, recreationally used drugs, for 15 plus years now.
Right.
And I've come out recently as one who says, I am a sober person who doesn't partake in those drugs yet. And I
Right.
do believe strongly in psychedelic usage,
Right.
very intentionally for our growth as individuals and then as the collective. And people have been very, very, very supportive. This is very recently, in the last, probably month,
Yeah.
Wow.
that I have
Okay.
actually come out
it's
really
new
recently.
that she's,
Okay.
Like, I've been talking about my recovery through
Right.
multiple 12-step programs. I protect my anonymity and anonymity of the programs by not mentioning specifically how I've
Right.
recovered. But If someone wants to know that, they can get in touch with me personally.
Right.
I've been out for a long time, loud and proud as a person in long-term recovery from alcohol and substances and behaviors.
Sure.
It's been about a month that I have revealed
Wow.
my use of psychedelic, what I call sacred medicines or therapeutics or
Right.
plant medicines or whatever else that we want to term them. And it's been overwhelmingly positive that people on social media have given me an outpouring of support. People that I don't even know saying yes, and they love to post their story of what working with mushrooms has done for them, what working
Right.
with ayahuasca has done for them, what working with 5-MeO DMT has done for them,
Right.
with depression, with anxiety, with actually cutting the chains of addiction in
Right.
their life.
Right.
I couldn't get off of alcohol, I'm hearing, for years until I started working with these medicines. I couldn't get off of drugs for years
Right.
until I started working with these medicines. And it warms my heart that I can now be, and I'm like, again,
I'm very happy to hear that, by the way, that
Yes.
people showed, I mean, that much support, and that's amazing.
yes, it is amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't even have a large following yet on social
Right.
media. I've mostly, maintained kind of private, and I've spoken to lots of groups of people. I've spoken on stages. I speak in detox and rehabs, and I give my time, and I have for years and years to do that. But I've never really done it intentionally with a following.
Sure.
And so it's not like I'm making a huge wave
Sure.
of this conversation, but I do feel that the psychedelic renaissance is upon us.
Right.
And I believe that the wave is here. And Chris and I are both willing to put ourselves, on that wave and say, yes, this is an important conversation to be had. I expected, honestly, a lot more friction from my recovery community in doing so. And that I'm sure some people who know me and love me are just not wanting to speak it. And that's okay too. I honor all
Right.
opinions. But where this is bringing me is that I've had one person literally say and bring up the conversation about the legalization of these substances. And they said, Hannah, I'm really glad to hear that the experiences worked for you, that it's working for all of these people. But what about the kids that could get a hold of them?
Yes.
What about when it gets on the street, like ketamine, for
Yes.
example, and is used as Special K as a street drug?
Right.
Highly detrimental to people's lives, destroying lives.
Absolutely.
At the same time, ketamine partnered with other psychedelics used clinically or
Right.
spiritually or in a sacred manner, in a
Right.
controlled manner,
Right.
is transformational for relationships
Absolutely.
and for people.
Absolutely.
So, and they're asking me, so the question was to me, well, what should happen with the legalization? What should happen
Right,
with the
right.
control that the government
Absolutely.
puts around these
Right.
substances to protect kids from overusing them?
Right.
And so, like, we're talking about it in a healing capacity, but there's also a destructive capacity.
Oh, absolutely.
Like with anything in the world,
Absolutely.
any medicine,
Absolutely.
opioids, obviously, like super potential to take away pain, but super destructive. So can we open up that can of worms in the conversation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, what you're talking about right now is sort of what when we went from making CBD to now, like, okay, well, we were the first company in the world to make psilocybin, psilocin, biosystine, norbiocystine, norpsilocin, all the 7 important molecules in psilocybin cubensis. We did that back in 2016.
You were the first one.
That's all
believe
magic
we were the
mushrooms,
first-
y'all, because all
Yeah.
the stuff that you just said, I don't
Yeah.
even know what that stuff is.
My
But those are,
apologies. Yeah.
this is what happens when you hang out with smart people.
Psilocybin cubensis, which is just which people are just called the regular shrooms, and we believe from what we know, right? And one of the first thoughts I had when this happened was that because I had done psychedelics previously, and so had my co-founder, and actually the LSD was my first experience. My second experience, or my first time with mushrooms, was with my co-founder, who was my roommate in college, who I had no idea that we would
Nice.
end up starting a company together. So it all, like, everything is coming, like, together, right? So we realized the destructive power of this too. So one of the decisions we made early on was we will not sell this to just anybody that wants to buy it. We could have made $100 million, $200 million by selling it in, like, the California market, another market. My view was that, if some kid gets a hold of our psilocybin and then he, recklessly, let's say, crashes his car or jumps out of a window, I would never be able to forgive myself, right? Because I enabled that particular situation.
Yeah.
So we made that decision early on that we would not directly sell to any person.
Okay.
By the way, is psilocybin legal in California now?
I think it's legal in certain cities, but not
Okay.
by the state.
Oh.
Yes.
Interesting.
So up in 8 years of the business, we have not sold a single gram of any psychedelic to any one person. That's not our business model at all. That's why we shifted to a different business model. Is we will work with other pharmaceutical or wellness companies and enable them to do clinical trials or other research, and that's what we've been doing. That's what generates our revenue to date. We went also a step further, which was that we got a DEA Schedule 1 license for R&D and other work. And the reason for that is we want to be federally compliant. We want to make sure that we are staying on that side, given how stringent things are in the U.S. And touching on my view on where the regulations are, I don't agree with them at all. I think Schedule 1 for psychedelics is ridiculous. I think it's, and even for cannabis, by the way, I think it's totally not how it should be. And there needs to be a complete overhaul of this.
To be clear, Schedule 1 puts psychedelics and cannabis in the same category as like heroin
And meth
and all those,
yeah,
which
all
is
the other
insane.
stuff. And interestingly enough, like there's others that are worse that are in later schedules. So I think I am an optimist. So I think that some change may be happening, and one of those changes was that starting in 2019, a bunch of psychedelic companies and started going public, and I think that created more awareness. That created a little bit more openness, more research, more clinical trials, and there are hundreds of clinical trials happening around the world at universities and places for that. So I think that's a very, very good step in the right direction. And secondly, I think there may be changes coming to the FDA soon enough, because the new head of HHS is RFK Jr. He is very pro psychedelic. So those two things definitely give me hope for the future.
That's amazing. So, kind of a personal question: Why have you stayed in the U.S. then, doing what you do and the impact that you can make? I mean, obviously,
Absolutely.
want to help Americans. That's cool,
Yes.
and the rest of
Right.
the world needs the help too. And there are plenty of areas in the world that you could.
Absolutely. So two reasons. So number one is because the best biotech talent in the world, in my opinion, again, is in California. It's up in the Bay Area, it's, in San Diego, LA area. People that have worked with the best projects out there. For example, one of our advisors, our first advisor, he is probably one of the godfathers of modern biotechnology. And getting him to help us out, and also like he helped us put together our team. That obviously was very valuable. Second reason is to be able to raise the kind of funding. We've raised somewhere around 11.5 million to date, which for a biotech company is like nothing, by the way.
Yeah.
And being able to produce this, you would have to have the connections, and then we were in Y Combinator, and it's also about what I've learned in 8 years of being in business is it's very important who right? Is your network of people. I see all the time companies that have raised money with like a napkin business plan, right? They like talk about the Sam Bankman-Fried. I mean, they had $200 million and they didn't even really have any like accounting. So how he got that money, right? Or like Elizabeth Holmes, or how did these people raise hundreds of millions to billions of dollars? It's because of who they knew. So I understand that for me to be able to do that, I would have to stay in the U.S. and grow the company there.
Makes sense. Are you able to do all the things in the U.S. and then export to other places?
So there are plans underway right now where we're working with another partner. We're setting up a manufacturing unit outside of the United States. I can't really go too much into it, but
cool.
what I will say is that because of these particular problems, for example, we have made, we've at least from what is publicly known, that is public information. I don't know of any other company, public or private, that has made this many number of psychedelics using biotechnology, period. And if
Right.
somebody knows, please put it in the chat so even I can know about them.
I love it.
So we started with all the molecules in psilocybin or mushrooms. Then we've made DMT, NMT, TMT, 5-MeO. We've made all kinds of other we've made mitragynine, 7-hydroxymitragynine, which is kratom. We've made the salvinorins, like 5 or 6 of them, which are in salvia. We've made ergolines that make LSD, and a bunch of others that we're working on or have already made. I think it's going to take some time, right, for the U.S. to get there. So now we're setting up with the help of a partner, a collaboration in outside of the U.S. We are also getting a Schedule 1 license from that jurisdiction.
Nice.
That will allow us to work with companies outside of the
Love it.
U.S.
So I'm going to change topics because when you were just going through that list, it made me think of something.
Sure.
You mentioned that you've created DMT.
Yes.
And all different versions of DMT,
Yes.
and then 5-MeO.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've experienced in my journeys and working with 5-MeO, which is one of my favorite medicines,
Right.
is that I talk to people about it.
Do you work with 5-MeO? I did not know
yeah,
that.
exactly. And so in working with that, I talk to people about it
Right.
pretty regularly.
Right.
And they're like, oh, I've done DMT. And I'm like, this is different. Can you help explain chemically and maybe like how it engages and interacts with the body? Why 5-MeO is so much different than DMT and how our bodies process it? Or is that something?
Sure. I mean, again, I probably don't know as much as you do because I have an overview of general psychedelics. Our specialty is in the biochemical manufacturing of it. But from what I do understand is it affects your receptors differently. There are HT2 receptors and other
Yep.
receptors. And frankly, I do believe that this research is in such early stages
Yeah.
that in 10, 15 years from now, we're going to learn a lot more than we know, right? I mean, imagine
For sure.
being in the 50s where they had all kinds of therapies that sound nonsense, nonsense to us. So I think we're in the very beginning, but from what I do know is the difference is how it binds, and maybe that information is out there or not. And again, I don't know too much about it, but I think it's all about the binding. One of the things that I've learned over the years working at different places is that fundamentally what it comes down to, or one of the major things of any medicine or any drug to work, is its 3D chemistry. So cells in our body have receptors which have a 3D shape, and the best way to explain this is a lock and a key. You could have a lock is a lock is like a receptor. It's on the cell surface, or it's on inside the cell as well. So you have a particular lock. There is only one type of key that can open it. So for example, it may be a cannabinoid like CBD or whatnot. Now that particular key will open up that lock. Now if you bring in a totally different type of key, it will not open that lock. But there are certain master keys that will open up many locks too. So there is a whole spectrum, just like the DMT may bind to a particular one or multiple receptors. Now 5-MeO could come in and it could bind to those particular receptors, maybe one or two different, but it may be a better fit, right? And especially if you're thinking about a glove and a baseball, right? Some people may have bigger hands, which means the glove is bigger, which means the fit might be better. Some people may have smaller hands, so even though the fit is there, it's not as good. So I think there's a whole range of these little factors that go into what specifically causes a particular outcome. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it did. It's just, to me, I don't know, maybe I'm a bit nerdy about this stuff, but I just look at it is when you look at 5-MeO, because the bioengineering of it is there's multiple people creating it at this point in
Right.
time. How do you know? And I guess this has always been my concern.
Sure.
How do you know the quality? How do you know it's the same? If somebody's like, oh, I've done this here, I've done it there, like
How
you have
would
different
one-
labs.
How would one
Yeah, how would one know?
determine
Right.
Yeah, how do you determine?
a
How do
reliable source? Or
Sure.
If because the pens are available
Right.
now for 5-MeO
Right.
or
And
they
for
seem to
DMT,
be getting rampant.
and they're
Like-
rampant. How
Right.
does the consumer? How would a consumer be able to identify the chemical properties or the
Right.
quality or the intention with which it was created? We
Sure.
believe in that.
Right.
How would a consumer? Can you help us to educate ourselves
Yeah.
in the process of
Unfortunately, the answer is that it's not very easy at all, right? Even for me.
Well, that sucks.
Right. It sucks.
Well,
right?
it means like your source is important.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right,
literally,
right,
it means like
right.
your dealer
Right.
isn't your medicine dealer is
Right.
important
I
because
would-
it has to get someone that you
Yeah.
from someone that you trust.
So the right
what I
method,
hear from that.
right? The right method, and this goes across the spectrum, not just for psychedelics, cannabinoids. This also goes for any other medicine or anything. The gold standard of analytical testing. So let's say you give me, a glass of water, and you say, hey, I have, psilocin or LSD or something or whatever you want to call it in this. The question is, how do I, or like even penicillin, for example, how do I determine what is in the glass and how much of it is in the glass, and is there anything else that's good or bad or detrimental, right? So the gold standard of that particular question is analytical lab testing. Like there's thousands of labs around the world you can send a sample to
Yeah.
to find out. And typically the two machines that they will use is either, or technologies, is either liquid chromatography mass spectrometry or gas chromatography mass spectrometry, short for LCMS or GCMS. So
I think I bought one of those machines last weekend.
Yeah,
They were
exactly.
on sale actually at Michael's. I was picking up some gems for the girls' clothes, and I think I found one of those
Okay.
machines.
Insert sarcasm.
Insert sarcasm. If you need one, let me know.
I was going
got-
to say, Jem,
He's
It was
like,
a buy one get one free at Michael's, and I picked
you need
one
to
up.
you need to take me to
That's
that
what
store. We're going to buy all their inventory
Yes,
tonight.
we shop at the same
Right.
places. Apparently, we just
So these machines, and I've used them for many years. I've set them up and calibrated, and these machines are very, very, very sensitive. They're a pain to use. They typically, a new one will typically cost you about $200,000 to $300,000.
we're shopping at different stores.
Oh yeah, I think so. I
It's
need, I
official.
need to go to that store. I just called them. We're buying the whole inventory tonight. So they're very expensive. The maintenance, it's a very, very specific thing. It takes forever to get it right. Every time you run it. So long story short is, I never would ever recommend anybody to do this on their own, because even for and I've been in the industry, and I will tell you, there's a lot of consultants and a lot of people and a lot of like these technicians that don't know what the hell they're doing, and they will screw things up. So go with a reputable lab. So if you get a medicine potentially from someone, number one, probably don't go with anybody you don't know. That's probably
Yeah.
rule number one.
Yeah.
But even if you know somebody, send that particular medicine to a testing lab. Get them to test it to find out what is the concentration, right? So how many milligrams, how many micrograms, how many grams of a particular molecule is in that, right? How many grams of creatine or whatever it is
Penicillin,
in
right.
here.
Yeah.
So that would be separate one. Number two would be to figure out, and coming back to what you said earlier, is even the same toad may not make the same secretion, and it varies.
Yeah.
Is to have a good idea of where you might be, right? You may want to figure out, because you probably heard of stories of people taking an edible, like a brownie, and then it turns out they took like 50 doses, and now they're like tripping on the couch and like
Yeah.
scared, and now they will never want to take it again. So that's another reason is why people will try something once and never go back, is because they just didn't know, and they just went all far out. So lab testing, I think, is the most essential thing you can do. And the third part of it is not only testing for that particular molecule, but also having that lab test for, are there pesticides in this? Are there heavy metals? And I think in the cannabis and psychedelics industry, I think this is the biggest problem in general is, the whole point of taking these products or drugs or medicines is that you want to heal yourself. Now, if you're a patient and now all of a sudden your vape cartridge for CBD or THC has heavy metals in it, right? When you do extraction, the process of extraction actually concentrates them. It does not take them out. So now you have ultra concentrated pesticides in your CBD or whatever, maybe in the pen, or heavy metals, right? And both of those things are really, really bad for somebody who might be sick. So number one, to go with find a trusted source, and B, definitely, it's going to cost you a few $100s, maybe more, depending on the full spectrum of testing that you would have to do. But I think that is the responsible thing to do, or get your dealer to do it, right?
Send you a report.
Right, exactly.
Is that something that your lab would do? Like, would any of our audience be able to utilize your lab for those services? Or
So typically,
you don't work retail?
We don't. I mean, we're happy to do it just to like benefit the community, but that's not what.
That's not your model.
That's not our
Okay.
business model. But if there happens to be something where we can help out somebody, I mean, we're happy to look into it and see if we can make something work. But worst case, if we don't do it or we don't have, let's say, because it takes a full proper staffing, it takes a proper infrastructure. We're happy to give you guys recommendations because I've worked in the industry. I know A to Z lab testing. I know certain labs that are just, they don't know what they're doing. Like, I'll give you an example that happened back in 2012. We were doing lab testing, and one lab testing company popped up. That I won't name the company, but that company said that they do virtual lab testing, which means
What?
that you don't have to send them a sample, right? And they'll just give you a test result. And we were laughing about it, right? We were in the lab, we were all sitting in the lab, and we were laughing about it because that's just the most ridiculous thing I've heard, right?
It's absurd.
Yeah, they're going to test the air around them and
that lab received investor funding. That lab was around for many years.
Yikes.
So just to give you an idea of how weird things can
That's
get.
insane.
How weird things
how
can
weird
get.
things
Yes.
can get. Well, so you would be able to maybe share some companies?
Absolutely, I'm happy
that we
to.
could drop in the description or
Absolutely,
something for
absolutely.
people? Okay.
And
Very cool.
yeah, I mean, and
Thank you.
I think just to give some names right now, I think, and again, I don't personally know them. I have no affiliation. I don't make any referral money or anything like that. But from my experience, Eurofins is a very reputable testing organization.
Okay.
I think, and then there's a few others like that. So if you Google Eurofins, there, a bunch of companies will pop up. You can select any one of them.
Okay.
Cool.
Very
Thank you.
cool.
Absolutely.
Wow, man. Like, you are just loaded with just cool information, knowledge on this space. I think it's, I feel blessed that we were in the same place at the same time. And
No,
we
I'm
came
blessed
across
I met
each
you
other.
guys, and it's been amazing.
Yes, thank you. And if anyone has further questions, I feel like we're just kind of opening the can of conversation with you about where particularly psychedelics and cannabis, but where they're going in the U.S. and where they're going internationally. It's really great that you're a resource for people to share the best case scenario, how they can help, but also not being so blinded to the idea that there is a detrimental side as well, and that people should be careful for personal use with the substances. People, as on a countrywide level, we should be careful with what's happening in all these directions also. So
I will. The last thing I will say is I believe that psychedelics have the power to transform people's lives. I mean, I can't even tell you the number of people over like the 8 years I've been doing this that I've had one-on-one conversations like with yourselves over dinner or met at somebody's house and talk about it, that their lives have completely turned around. Now, having said that, I do think that be very careful, because this is not your let's just smoke a joint or let's just have a glass of wine and whatever. So I think, and again, there is a small percentage of the population that is predisposed to having very adverse effects. So be very careful. Be careful about how you're sourcing this as well. But I think for people that I think that are happy in their life, that are where they want to be, I think for psychedelics maybe not needed, right? Because you already are where you are. But if you've tried pharmaceutical drugs, because look, I've worked for Big Pharma, and Big Pharma's business model is, we're not going to cure you. Our business model is, we're going to give you one pill a day, and that's going to give us recurring revenue for the rest of our lives. Now, when you talk about psychedelics, and I think this actually is one of the reasons why Big Pharma over the years has sort of lobbied against it, is because that completely turns their business model over its head. But having said that, I do believe they have the power to transform lives. Make sure whatever psychedelics you get are tested, and you need them and have the right setting, but also that they are sustainably sourced. Like, don't get them from tortured toads and things like that. So that would be my leaving message.
I love that. Well, thank you. From what I understand, there's not many people in the world that do what you do. So thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for leading the charge.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've done a podcast in my life, but I think this was the most relaxed, most authentic setting, and frankly, it's a pleasure to know you guys and be here. So thank you again.
It's a blessing. So, guys, if you have any questions, comment in the comment section below. We're going to get together, put together all the links, put them in the description below, and for anything that we've talked about to this point in time. And that's it for now. So if you haven't already, subscribe, hit the bell, do all the things, connect with us. And until next time, keep healing, keep growing, keep thriving. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Awesome.